I'm going to share with you, it's never too late with your children to learn to relate in new ways. So if you learn something here today, don't go home and go, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. Instead, go, oh, this is something new that I'm going to try. And then also, I'm assuming many of you have grandchildren. I know that I spoke with Sharon earlier, and she has her granddaughter in her care. And I know that increasingly grandparents are caring for young children. So I'm hoping that what we talk about today will be helpful to you. I want to start with a passage from Ellen White. And I just love this. It says, as the mother, and I would say, or father, teaches her children to obey her because they love her, she is teaching them the first lessons in the Christian life. The mother's or father's love represents to the child the love of Christ, and the little ones who trust and obey their mother and father are learning to trust and obey the Savior. Now, I want you to think about this passage, and I want you to tell me what are some important words in there. Now, what you must, I probably should have said this, I have a teaching background, not a preaching background. So if you came expecting to just be able to sit back in the pew and maybe have a snooze, then I'm probably not going to deliver, because I'm going to be asking you questions and asking you to participate, all right? So what are some important words in there? Teach. Good. All right, what are we teaching as parents? Which? Obedience. Very good. What else? Trust. One more. Love. All right? So we have love and trust, and we have obey. And so the love and the trust are the foundation for the obey. All right? The obedience flows out of the love and trust. And not only that, but it forms a foundation to be able to love and trust and obey God. Now, I'm going to ask my husband to come up here, and he's going to help me with something. I've just got these little things here, and I'm going to give these two to him. So if you could switch them around. So we have love, and we have trust, and we have obedience. And if you could come a little closer. And so in this passage, what we have is that we need love and trust and obedience all working well together. Now, I want you to think about this. What would a family look like if it had only this? It would be incomplete. What would it look like? Which? Godless? Not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of love going around, and everybody is loving each other, and maybe they even love God. Okay? What do you think? There's no discipline, right? There are no rules. There are no expectations of how people are going to behave. All right? Now, what if we had only this? What does that look like? No love and no trust, but just a lot of obedience. What would that look like? Fear, okay? And harshness. And if you think about this passage from Ellen White, the way that these three things work together helped children and helped you when you were growing up understand God. So if you grew up in a home like that, which isn't very common, you will think that God is a little bit of a Santa in the sky who just is there to provide all of your needs but has no expectations of your behavior. Alternately, if you grew up in a home like this, which is more common, you're going to be afraid of God. And you're going to see God as very harsh and judgmental. And that's why it's so important in our families that we balance these three things. Thank you, sweetheart. And the amazing thing is, Ellen White knew this a long time ago, and we in our church, in our denomination, have been fortunate enough to have guidance from Ellen White. But we actually know this now from research. So Diana Beaumont is a sociologist who did some study at the University of California, and this was back in the 60s, and she looked at different families to see how they functioned, and then she proposed a model of how different families relate to these three things, or actually really just two. She just went and did these: love and obedience. And she called it demandingness and responsiveness. And I'm not sure if you can see those details up there on the screen. But if you have a look, the orange square is called authoritarian. Can you see that? Yep, awesome. So the orange square is authoritarian, which is she calls too hard. And that's where we have high demandingness, but low responsiveness, meaning not much love. And children who grew up in very authoritarian homes end up often having difficulty with trusting themselves and being able to make choices themselves, because choices have always been imposed on them and they haven't had the practice of choosing. Now, we also have, in the opposite corner, we have the indulgent parent. Do you see that one? That's kind of the light, very pale lilac. And so this is the too soft, the opposite, okay? The too soft parent. There isn't enough structure. There aren't enough guidelines. There isn't enough teaching. There's a lot of love going around, but there isn't much structure. And children in these environments also grow up with the difficulty to trust themselves and know how to behave and know how to make choices because they weren't guided. We also have in the dark purple, we have the indifferent family. And so this would be the family that has neither. These are the checked out families. She calls them checked out. And these would be families where there might be addictions like alcohol addiction or drug addiction. They would be families where there might be mental illness. And so the parents are literally just checked out and not involved in the child's life at all. And these children grow up with the most difficulty. If you talk to young men who are incarcerated, you'll find that the majority of them have grown up without a dad in their lives. And the dad at least was checked out, and mom might have been too. And then we have what Ellen White would consider the ideal, and that would be the authoritative parent. Now, do you see the difference? There's authoritarian and authoritative. And that means the authoritative, she calls just right. So we have just the right balance of love and just the right balance of obedience or expectations. And that's what we're going to just kind of unpack a little bit this morning. What does that look like for kids? So let's look at the love and trust or mercy if we think about Micah's wording. The first thing that kids need is affection and nurture. And this begins in infancy, when we physically nourish a baby, we hold a baby, and we bond with that baby during the pregnancy and then also in infancy. Once the child is born, nursing and holding, that all contributes to the attachment between the infant and the caregiver, whether it be a mother or a father or a nanny, some kind of substitute caregiver. When children receive adequate affection and nurture, one other thing. So it's physical affection and eye contact and smiling. So holding, caressing, hugging, but also eye contact and smiling, feeling like you're happy to see them. I have a child who really, her eye contact is really important to her. She's now 20, so she doesn't do this anymore. But when she was little, when she was quite little, when she was wanting to talk to me, if she was on my lap, and I would be talking to somebody else or doing something else, she would take my face and turn it to hers so that I would eyeball her. When she got older, it was still important to her, and I would forget sometimes. And she would come home from school and she'd be telling me something, and I'd be, maybe in the kitchen chopping something, and she would say, "Mommy, are you listening to me?" And I'd say, "Yes, I'm listening." And she said, "I need you to listen to me with your eyes." And so I've recognized that this is really important, and some of us do this better than others. I didn't do it particularly well because I don't think it happened in my family a lot. If you've grown up in a very busy home, you probably didn't get a lot of, that kind of eye contact, attention. And so it's harder for you. I know this was something that was hard for me, but you can learn, and that's the good news. So if you have consistent and attentive care, then you end up with a secure bond with your child. And what is the outcome of that? It means that the child learns basic trust. They learn that it's safe to open their hearts to others. They learn that the world is generally a safe place. But they also learn that God is loving and that He is trustworthy. And I think we all want our kids to know that, and that He's available to them during the times when they're distressed. So that's physical affection and nurture. So that's number one. Number two is words of affirmation. This is another one I didn't do really well. This is the messages that our children hear from us about our value and about their value and their worth. If the need for this is adequately met, children learn a basic sense of self. They know who they are. They know that they have worth in their parents' eyes, in God's eyes, and they then learn to relate to other people without needing their validation all the time. They don't need for people to tell them, "You're okay, you did a great job, what an amazing person you are." They don't need that so much because they already have that inside of them because they got it when they were growing up. They also learn that God sees them as having value and worth. Once again, that's something that we want our kids to have. Attention, being physically and emotionally present. Which of those is easier, physically or emotionally present? Physically, it's easier for us to be physically present. Although even like in the 21st century, I think a lot of parents struggle to be physically present because of our very fast-paced lives. But the sad thing is that for a lot of children, their parents come home from work, they're tired, and they are physically present, but they're not emotionally present. And so this is an important piece of parenting, that we actually pay attention to our children, that we play with them, that we talk with them, and that we listen to them. When we were living in Fiji, I had a young lady who used to, she came to my door one day knocking, looking for a job, and I gave her a job in my home, helping out and cleaning. And I was just at the stage of starting to teach in the area of family life, and I was going to do a presentation for a group of Fijian ladies. And I asked my Fijian friend, Mere, I said to her, what have you seen in my home that's been really different from the way that Fijian families function? And she said, she just started talking. She's like, "I talk about you to everybody because you listen to your children." And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Listening is so important. Children grow up with the sense that they have something important to say. You pay attention to them. If we meet this, then they learn that it's okay to be a child. It's okay to want to play. It's okay to want to talk about the things that are important to them. They also learn to relate to other people without needing to take care of them. I don't know if you've heard the term parentified child. That is a child who's had to grow up too quickly and take care of others in their family. These are children who didn't get adequate attention because, for whatever reason, the parent was just unable, whether it was due to illness or addiction or busyness. Okay? But if children get this, they grow up knowing it's okay for them to have been a child, and it's okay for them they don't have to look after the parents. The parents look after them. They also learn that God is available and attentive to them when they need him. So do you remember what the first three were? It was attention and nurture. What was the second one? Come on, help me out, because I don't remember. Thank you, excellent. Words of affirmation. So attention and nurture, words of affirmation, and attention. All right? So that's number 3. We're going to go through these. I'm going to have you recall them so that you remember them. And number 4 is protection. So this takes many different forms. It can be protecting a child from dangerous kitchen utensils by having little locks on the cupboard doors. It can mean protecting them with a fence on your property so that they don't run out and get bitten by a dog or hit by a car. It can mean protecting them from bullies at school, doing what you can to step in and help resolve a situation at school. It can also mean protecting them from an adult predator in their lives. So protection is a very wide range of different things. And if this is met for children, they get a basic sense of security about life. Even when things are going wrong, they have a sense that they're safe, that they're going to be okay. They also learn to set healthy boundaries. And this is an important piece of growing up. Learning that it's okay to say no to somebody. Learning that it's okay to stand up for your own safety. You can see the implications of that. And in this way, they learn to relate to the world with confidence. They don't feel overwhelmed by the world. And they also grow up to see God as protective, as God as a source of protection, as God as someone that they can ask for protection. Next one, comfort. So what does this mean? It means that when a child is hurt, is it okay to cry? Now, I don't know what it's like in your culture. I see that there are a variety of cultures here. But in my culture, it was often okay for girls to cry, but not okay for boys to cry. And so if it's not okay to cry, you learn to just bottle everything up inside and not feel. And so we actually have a lot of men walking around who struggle with feeling okay about sharing their griefs, their sadnesses, because they were told as a little one, this size, boys don't cry. Are you a man or are you a mouse? All right? That's not a really good way to relate to boys. I didn't have boys, so I don't know what it's like raising a boy. I only had girls. And when I've seen boys crying, I find some of those old tapes from my culture going in my head. It's like, this boy shouldn't be crying. He's a boy. It's a cultural thing that we've all somehow absorbed. But it's important for both boys and girls to know that it's okay to cry and it's okay to receive comfort. I have seen families in which children never cry, where they fall over and hurt themselves. They look at mum over at the other side of the room and they say to themselves, I think they must say to themselves, it's not worth going to mum, I'm just going to pick myself up and keep going. And in some ways, that's great for the mum, because the child is able to be independent and not be, a big crybaby. But it also means that child never really learned to receive comfort. And if we learn to receive comfort, we learn that it's okay for us to feel and to grieve our losses. When bad things happen, it's okay to be sad. And that's important because we also learn to relate to other people with compassion and empathy and to offer comfort. We also learn that God can be a source of comfort. I love this verse from 2 Corinthians. It says, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our trouble so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. So do you see how receiving comfort is important? All right, let's go through the list. First one, attention, affection and nurture. Second one, words of affirmation. Third one, attention. Fourth one, protection. And the fifth one is comfort. Excellent, you're remembering very well. All right, the next one is guidance. And as I've taught this around the world in different places, I find often people who had even really wonderful parents and they received those first 5, this is something that sometimes parents don't know how to do. And this is with older children, teaching them about life, about relationships, about how to make decisions. It's guiding them along the path towards adulthood. Sometimes as parents we feel that our teenagers don't really need us anymore except to discipline them when they've broken a rule. But really what they need is they need a lot of guidance on the road to adulthood. And if we provide guidance for them, they will have confidence in their decision making, because they will have had practice making decisions with your support, with an adult's support. They will also learn to relate to others interdependently. Now, what do I mean by that? What does an independent person, how does an independent person function? Sorry? Doesn't need anybody, exactly. All right? So if you haven't received guidance, you have the sense that you've really only got yourself to rely on for making these decisions. And so, independence is a good thing, but we want healthy independence. We don't want premature independence. And what's the other extreme? What's the other end? Do you know what we call that? Overly relying on others, okay? And we don't want that either, because we want our kids to grow up with confidence. So interdependence means that I rely on you, you rely on me. It's kind of a back and forth. They also learn that God can be a source of guidance, and they learn to ask him for guidance in those times of need. So there are, I think it was 6. Affection, words of affirmation, attention, protection, comfort, guidance. We've got the next one, and this is the discipline needs of children. So do you remember our verse? do justice, love mercy. So we've talked about the love mercy. We're now going to talk about the do justice, which is discipline. Proverbs 22:6 is a favorite of most parents. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And this is a little passage from Ellen White. One well-ordered, well-disciplined family is a greater power in demonstrating the efficiency of Christianity than all the sermons in the world. That's a pretty powerful statement. Than all the sermons in the world. One well-ordered, well-disciplined family. But what is discipline? So, the root word of discipline is the word disciple. Is that a word that you often think of when you think about disciplining your children? It's not one that I often thought about, okay? But the root word is disciple. Now, in the Greek, the word that we translate into English as disciple is mathetes, which is one who learns. And so if you think about discipline, it's helping a child learn, all right? And what is it we want our children to learn? The number one thing we want them to learn is to become self-disciplined, right? We want them to internalize what we teach them so that they can live it out without us always hovering over them. And I love, love, love this little passage from Ellen White. She says, the object of discipline is the training of the child for self-government. While under authority, the children may appear like well-drilled soldiers. But when the control ceases, the character will be found to lack strength and steadfastness. Okay? So if you think about the family that had this, but not much of this, okay, but just lots and lots and lots and lots of this, not much guidance, not much love, they're going to be like well-drilled soldiers, aren't they? Somebody here said fear is what drives these families or the kids in these families. They're going to be like well-drilled soldiers. And sometimes families who do function like this wonder what happened when their kids hit the teenage years, why they suddenly are all over the map. It's because they didn't learn how to discipline themselves, how to manage themselves. Ellen White also says this, at a very early age, children can comprehend what is plainly and simply told them. It is not necessary to resort to harsh measures. A firm, steady hand and a kindness which convinces the child of your love will accomplish the purpose. I read passages like that and I recognize all the many times I've failed as a parent, and it's a painful thing for me. But I also know that when my children were growing up, I always prayed that God would make up for my deficiencies. And so I trust that He will. Because I know that I wasn't always kind in the way that I related to my children. So we want self-discipline. What else do we want? We want the child to feel loved through the processes of discipline. This is the little passage we have at the beginning. As the mother teaches her children to obey her because they love her, she's teaching them the first lessons in the Christian life. We also want guidance towards right action, which is much, much better than punishment for wrong action. Wouldn't you agree? So much better. If we can guide them towards what is right and help them stay away from what is wrong, rather than punishing them once they fall over, fall down. I remember when my children were little, I read just a little line that said, "Catch your children being good." You know, as parents, we often catch them when they're being bad. But catch them when they're being good and encourage that. another passage from Ellen White. This is a long one, but I hope you'll bear with me because I think it's amazing. Parents and grandparents, in the training of your children, study the lessons that God has given in nature. If you would train a pink or rose or lily, how would you do it? Ask the gardener by what process he makes every branch and leaf to flourish so beautifully and to develop in symmetry and loveliness. He will tell you that it was by no rude touch, no violent effort, for this would only break the delicate stems. It was by little attentions, often repeated. He moistened the soil and protected the growing plants from the fierce blasts and from the scorching sun, and God caused them to flourish and to blossom into loveliness. In dealing with your children, follow the method of the gardener. By gentle touches, by loving ministrations, seek to fashion their characters after the pattern of the character of Christ. Isn't that beautiful? I just love that. Keep it simple, all right? I can't stress this enough. Rules should be few and well considered. Okay, so I'm sorry, I put two things up there. Rules should be few and well considered, and when once made, they should be enforced. If we have lots and lots of rules, kids can't keep up with what the rules are. And despite the many mistakes that my husband and I might have made with our children, there have been times in our lives when we've felt very gratified by certain things that they have said or done. And I just want to share one thing around this. One day we were in church in America, in a very large church, and the youth pastor came to come and speak with us. And he caught us like in a hallway and he said, "You have a really interesting family." And we just went, okay, what have they been saying now? And he said, "Your daughters said you have no rules in your house." And we went, "Really? No rules?" And they said, "Yeah." He said, "Yes." It was him, he and his wife. They said, "Yes." They said, "You have no rules." They said, "You just do things because you love each other, not because they're rules." And I just was so warmed in my heart over that, because isn't that what we want our children to do? To obey us because they love us? Isn't that what we want for our children in the way they relate to God? To obey God because they love Him? And one of the ways to do this is, as Ellen White says, have a few rules, make them well considered, and enforce them. And I think if we could put it down to two rules in our family, it would have been: you don't hurt people and you don't damage things. Everything beyond that was kind of, we could figure it out. But those two things we stressed over and over again to the girls. You're not allowed to hurt other people. You're not allowed to damage other people's things. And then control your anger. This was the hard one that was for me. My husband, I have to brag on him. In 31 years, he's never said an unkind word to me. And that's with my hand over my heart. That's the honest truth. Sadly, he would not be able to say the same thing about me. Because when we first got married, I could go from 0 to 10 really quickly. I could just, it would just bubble up in me, this Urgh! And I kind of slowly learned to manage it in the early part of our marriage. And then we had children and it all started up again. And so for me, learning to control my anger has been a lifelong journey. And if you ask my husband now, he would tell you, I've come a long, long way. But it's only by the grace of God and with a lot of effort on my part. So control your anger. This is what she said. When you're obliged to correct a child, do not raise the voice to a high key. Do not lose your self-control. The parent who, when correcting a child, gives way to anger is more at fault than the child. And fortunately, I have one child who is very sensitive to even a slightly raised voice. And when she was little, if I even slightly raised my voice, she'd say, "Mommy's yelling at me." And so I learned to avoid, because it was just so upsetting to her. She's a very sensitive child, very quiet. And so that was also helpful for me. So, steps for teaching children obedience. Let's look at some practical things. If you want your child to obey, let's say they're in the bathtub, you've been bathing them, they're washed, they're clean, it's time to get out, they've had some time to play in the tub. You need them to get out because you need to get on with your evening and you just need to get them to bed, but they don't want to get out. So how do we get obedience? When I learned this, it was just life-changing. First thing, make eye contact and request what you want, okay? Now, why do we want to make eye contact? Attention, exactly, so that they know that you know that that they understand what you want, all right? So you make eye contact and you request proper behavior, meaning say please, all right? Like you would to any other person. Please hop out of the tub. It's time to get out of the tub now. Now, if you have no compliance, you go the next step and you say, do it now. All right? Now, you want compliance, obedience, now. If there's no compliance, you progress to what is known as gentle physical manipulation. What does that mean? You put your hands on their shoulders and you gently move them in the direction that you want them to go. The same thing for if they've got toys that they haven't picked up. The toys are over here, the kid is over here. You gently move them in that direction so that they know that you mean business and you really want them to move. Okay? Now, when you've done that, and if there is still no compliance, that's when you would progress to either a natural or a logical consequence. Now, I'm going to unpack that for you, of what that is. But do you see that progression? You request, you make eye contact and you request, you ask nicely, then you ask more sternly, and then you help them move along, right? And most kids by that stage will comply unless they're in a really angry, rebellious mood for some reason. But most kids by this time will comply. And if they don't, we go on to natural or logical consequences. Let's just unpack that. What are natural consequences? A natural consequence is something uncomfortable that happens when rules are not followed. It's kind of a natural kind of thing. Let me give you an example. When a child runs outdoors barefoot after being warned about splinters on the wood patio, a splinter is a natural consequence. In our family, a bee sting has been a natural consequence of ignoring that, all right? Running on the grass, getting stung by a bee after being told numerous times that they shouldn't, being eventually stung. When a child deliberately breaks a toy, it is not replaced. All right? That's a natural consequence. What would be a natural consequence of not getting out of the tub? Sorry? Pull the plug? Yes, you could pull the plug. What else could you do? I would pull the plug and still do something else because they also need to know that they've been disobedient, and so there's a natural consequence. Normally, in most families, after a bath comes a story, right? Often in the evenings, you have a bath, you have a story, you go to bed. Sorry, time's run out, you stalled in the bathtub, there's no time for a story. That would be a natural consequence, right? If a child does not eat at dinner time and insists on continuing to play video games through family dinner, a parent might allow the child to miss the meal, not making any special provisions or fixing him another meal when he gets hungry. You didn't come to dinner? You miss out. Sorry, you wait till breakfast time. Okay? Natural. It's just the natural thing that happens. We also have I'm sorry, have I got... Oh, one other point here. Natural consequences should not be used when the consequence is potentially harmful or dangerous. What would be a natural consequence of disobeying you and running out in front of a bus? It's not a natural consequence you would want for your child, is it? Okay? So we don't want them to experience anything dangerous as a result of them disobeying. We have to be sensible about this. And then there are what we call logical consequences. This is similar to natural consequences, but you then describe to your child what the consequence will be for unacceptable behavior. And it's directly linked to the behavior. So you tell your child that if he doesn't pick up his toys, then those toys will be removed for a week. Just put them all away in a box, up high in a cupboard. No toys for a whole week. That's a logical consequence. Or this one, you tell your child that if she isn't dressed in time for breakfast tomorrow, she'll miss out on breakfast. This is one I used with my daughter when she was 3. And in all the books that you read, they will tell you that you must never withhold food from your child. But I was at my wits' end as to how to get compliance on this. She just refused to get dressed in the morning and insisted on staying in her pajamas. And I wanted her to get dressed because we had places to go in the morning. So I told her one day that tomorrow, if she didn't get dressed, she would be missing out on breakfast. And she just looked at me. The next day, in the morning, she came down. We had this house that had 3 little steps coming into the kitchen. She sat down on the steps in her pajamas, watching as I made breakfast. And I said to her, "Do you remember what I said about no breakfast unless you're dressed?" "Mm-hmm." And I said, "So you don't want any breakfast?" "Mm-mm." So I said, "Okay." And she didn't have any breakfast. And then I felt like such a terrible mom. And so what I did is I packed them up into the car and I took them to the library for story time where I knew there would be snacks. And the snacks wouldn't be from me. So we went to the library. They had a story. They had little snacks. And then we came home and we had a very early lunch. But the amazing thing is I never again had a problem with her getting dressed in the morning, even though the consequence really wasn't that painful to her. But what she learned, what did she learn? That I meant what I said. Okay, so that's what's so important when you tell a child about a logical consequence, that you actually follow through. You should never say to a child that something will happen when you know that you can't actually make that happen. All right, sometimes we threaten things that we know that we can't follow through. They're really big, scary things, but if we stop to think about it, we know we wouldn't be able to enforce that. And if our kids find that out, then you're done for. Right? So logical consequences, I think I've got here. They teach children that their actions have consequences, and this helps them develop self-discipline. All right? Because they've learned that, because they disobeyed you and ran out on the wood patio and they got a splinter, they learned that there's a consequence. And so they learn self-discipline, because next time, before running out on the patio barefoot, they'll think twice. or out on the grass where the bees are. Or the next time they're tempted not to pick up their toys or get out of the tub, they will remember what happened last time. Do you see how that builds in learning of self-discipline? Okay. They learn that following rules is necessary for effective living. And they lie less, they blame less, and they hide less than they do when they live in fear of punishment. Okay? Because if a child lives in fear, they're going to hide the things that they did wrong. They're going to lie about the things that they did wrong. And they're going to feel shame or blame somebody else. Okay? So, natural consequences and logical consequences. How much more time do I have? What time am I meant to be done? Like now? 10 minutes? Okay, thank you. So rewards and punishment. This is what most people want to hear a little bit about. And I'm not a big fan of rewards and punishment. I think that sometimes we use rewards and punishment as a substitute for spending adequate time with our children. We give them timeouts when we haven't given them any time together with you, right? But the big thing is that they learn to relate to the world and to you as a parent as, what's in this for me? If I do this, what's the reward I'm going to get? If I don't do this, what's the punishment I'm going to get? And ultimately, that's how they learn to relate to God. That everything is only about rewards and punishment. Rewards and punishment can be used for recurrent, specific behavior for which the child is neither defiant nor sorry. And that means like some kind of bad habit that they have learned. And you're trying to help them break this bad habit. So then you might have, you could have a star chart for young children. You could have some kind of privileges for older children. Something to encourage them to form a new habit, a new better habit. Not helpful for defiant behavior like disobedience. Punishment for children can include timeouts for young children and a loss of privileges for older children. Okay. Now, the question that I get a lot is, how about spanking? And I knew that by the time I'd get to this point in the talk that there wouldn't be a lot of time, so I had to keep this very short. But I just want to share a little bit about spanking. Christian parents use spanking more than other people, than other families, because they believe that it's scriptural because of the use of the word rod in the scriptures. But if you think about a shepherd's rod, and you think about the root word of discipline, which is disciple, we want to teach our children. I think there are different ways to interpret the concept of a rod. I don't think it has to be a stick. I think it can be a whole variety of different things. And I want to read you this from Ellen White. Never strike a child in anger. And guess what? When my children were little, the only time I wanted to spank them was when I was angry. Does that resonate with any of you? The only time I wanted to spank them was when I was angry. So I realized, you know what? I'm just going to have to be one of those parents who doesn't spank their kids because I don't know how to control my anger when spanking. I'm only spanking because I'm angry. She says, you may have to punish him with the rod. This is sometimes essential, but defer any settlement of the difficulty until you've settled the case with yourselves. Ask yourself, have I submitted my way and my will to God? Have I placed myself where God can manage me so that I may have wisdom, patience, kindness, and love in dealing with the refractory elements in my home? My sense is that by the time you've done that, your desire to spank your child will have passed. In another place, Ellen White says that a spanking might be something that's essential, but only once in a lifetime. So, if you're relying on spanking of children, it's really not a way of discipling your children in the most effective way. And I have a story that I wanted to read you, just to finish up here. I've got 5 minutes. This is a story by Astrid Lindgren. Astrid Lindgren. Have you ever read the story or seen the film Pippi Longstocking? Anybody know that story? It's a Swedish story that's been translated into English, and she's a Swedish author. This is what she wrote. When I was about 20 years old, I met an old pastor's wife who told me that when she was young and had her first child, she didn't believe in spanking children, although spanking with a switch pulled from a tree was standard punishment at the time. But one day, when her son was 4 or 5, he did something that she felt warranted a spanking, the first in his life. She told him that he would have to go outside himself and find a switch for her to punish him with. The boy was gone a long time, and when he came back in, he was crying. He said to her, "Mama, I couldn't find a switch, but here's a rock that you can throw at me." All of a sudden, the mother understood how the situation felt from the child's point of view. That if my mother wants to hurt me, then it makes no difference what she does it with. She might as well do it with a rock. And the mother took the boy into her lap, and they both cried. Then she laid the rock on a shelf in the kitchen to remind herself forever, never violence. And that is something I think everyone should keep in mind, because if violence begins in the nursery, one can raise children into violence. I'm just on time, look at that. So I hope that what we've talked about has given you a sense of there are options other than spanking, other than hitting your children. And it takes everything that Ellen White says, wisdom, patience, kindness, and love to intelligently approach the disciplining or discipling of children. And I hope I've given you some practical suggestions for how to do that. Thank you for your attention, and I would love to pray with you before we break. Our loving Father in heaven, we are so grateful that you put each one of us into a family. And we know that families are imperfect because we live in a broken, sinful, imperfect world. And each one of us is an imperfect parent if we're a parent. And we ask that you will give us all that we need, the patience and wisdom and kindness and love, to be able to, in the best ways possible, share your love with our children and our grandchildren. And I also pray that when we mess up, that you will forgive us and that you will put other people into our children's lives who can make up for our shortcomings. In your name I pray these things. Amen. See you in the second half of the service.
Good morning and happy Sabbath, church. We're just having a short intermission before we do divine service. We'll be changing the program a little bit from today. We'll be having a hymn before the elders come up and do the welcome. And we have an announcement as well from the adventurers, which will come up soon. So if you can just please remain reverent inside the church. If you need to go to the bathroom, please do so. If you need to talk, please do it outside of the sanctuary. Thank you.